Welcome to my second video for Pitlochry Festival Theatre's Shades of Tay, taken by me photo competition. As you can see, I've come outside with my dog to take some photographs and to give you a few tips that might help you in the competition. Now, I was hoping to get up to the lovely Silvery Tay today, but what with COVID-19 and travel restrictions, I thought it was safer to stay in my local area. I'm originally from Perth and I live in Edinburgh, so I didn't want to travel all the way up in breach of those travel regulations. That's something you may need to think about in the weeks ahead as well when you're out and about taking these photos. Just be aware of the guidelines. Don't take any unnecessary risks. Your health is always far more important than a photograph. So that's the boring stuff out of the way. So I've come out here to East Lothian and I've chosen this location out near Preston Mill in East Linton. And we're going to take some photographs and I'll give you a few tips. We'll look at composition, maybe how to frame certain images, and we'll see what you can do to transform something that may look a little bit dull into something that might look a lot more interesting. First thing I want to talk to you about is something called rule of thirds. And to do that, I'm going to transfer back to Alan, who's in the studio. Thanks, Alan. Rule of thirds is a compositional rule of thumb that can help by placing certain elements of your photographs in key areas. And the theory behind it is it creates a more balanced, visually pleasing image. So let's look at an example of that just now, and I'll show you what I mean. The idea behind rule of thirds is this. It states that if you split your image up into 9 equal boxes and put an important element of your image on either one of these horizontal lines or vertical lines, or especially on the points where they intersect, that will create a visually pleasing and well-balanced image. So let's have a look at a few examples of that. So this shot here, let's overlay the grid and see where the important points lay. And we can see here that this vertical is where the sign is. We've got a nice intersection point here where the RAC symbol is. We also have a rough split between the bottom 2/3 of the image and roughly the top third for the sky, which again is something that works quite well. Let's move on to the next shot. Here again, if we overlay the image, you can see that roughly the post box rather is on one of these intersection lines, and again the post box is on one of these vertical lines as well. This sheep maybe is roughly on this bottom horizontal line here, and again roughly 2/3 to 1/3 of foreground to sky, which again seems to work well. It doesn't always have to be perfect though. In this example, let's put our grid on. We can see that the sand is roughly 1/3, the sea is roughly 1/3, and the sky is roughly 1/3. It's not perfect, but it does the job, and that essentially is the rule of thirds, rule of thumb. There we go. Hopefully that's been of some use to you. Let's head back to East Lothian now to On Location Alan. Welcome back to chilly East Lothian. I hope you enjoyed that little brief interlude on rule of thirds. It's a concept that you can use all the time, and it just helps create a little bit of interest and a little bit of dynamism in your photographs, and it's very easy to do. Once you start thinking along the lines of rule of thirds, you'll start using it all the time. I've set up this shot here in a kind of very rough rule of thirds format, with the mill over to one side and the subject me on the other side of the photograph. You don't need to be entirely strict with it. You don't need to follow the exact intersection points that we looked at earlier. But in general, I quite like to put the main subject of a photograph over to one side, which leaves a lot of space on the other side of the photograph, which I just always think makes for a more interesting shot. So I'm going to take a few photos of this mill just now, and then we'll go back to the studio and we'll look at possibly how we might want to crop them or slightly adjust them to make them more interesting. So that's what I'm going to do right now, and then we'll head back to the studio to other Alan, who again is sitting in the warmth. See you in a little bit. Welcome back. Let's look at cropping. Cropping images is a very straightforward way to emphasize the important parts of the image and hopefully maximizing the visual impact of your photographs. So let's look at an example now. So here's an image of the mill, and you can see that I quite like it, but there's this whole area here over to the right which isn't really doing much, to be honest. It's just a big block of stone. So what I'd quite like to do is just really discard that by cropping in on my image. So if I choose the crop tool, and I quite simply just drag the crop tool in till I get to roughly the area that I quite like, and then I crop the image and I end up with an image like that, which I just think is a better shot, and I can even rotate it a little bit to correct my verticals, and there we go. So that I think is a far nicer shot than the original, which looked like that. So we've basically gone from that to that. There we go. Very straightforward, very quick, and a really powerful way to exclude the parts of the image that you don't really need and to concentrate on the part of the image that you find most interesting. So, back to Alan. Okay, welcome back. Now, one of the categories in this competition is wildlife photography. Now, I've got a great respect for wildlife photographers just because of the patience and the skill involved in taking these stunning images that we see. Where I am just now doesn't really have a great deal of wildlife other than this wild beast that we have here. Yes, you. So all I'm going to do is give you one very quick tip for photographing animals, wildlife, pets, even children, to be quite honest. And it's quite simply this: try and get down to their level when you take the shot. It creates a much more interesting photograph rather than standing up high and shooting down on them. So I've taken a couple of portraits of Molly here, and we'll look at the difference between the one from above and the one from dog eye level, and I think you'll see the difference. So another important element of composition can be leading lines, and that is when lines in a photograph lead into the image and it takes the viewer's eye into the central part of the shot, which is the part that you generally want them to be looking at. Bridges are very good for this. You have the lines here going backwards and forwards. Also rivers, with the bank to the rivers forming a V, and it leads the viewer into the image. So that's something to think about as well. There'll be plenty of opportunity to get these kind of views on the River Tay, close to it, or actually on the river itself. It's an important compositional tool, and it's one that works very, very well. You can see that I've also chosen a slightly different angle for this shot in the video. I like looking at photographs in a slightly different way than the flat, square, normal. So don't be afraid to tilt your cameras to get slightly skew with angles on things. It always makes the shots look slightly more interesting than your standard square, straight shot. So give that a go as well and see what the results are. Compositionally, I always like lines and angles, shapes and textures as well in my photographs. I find them very pleasing. You get a lot of those elements in industrial areas, industrial buildings, but you can also see them in the natural world as well. So that might be something you want to also experiment with. You can experiment with angles of photographs. You can get quite sort of arty, strange images with peculiar angles. So that's a route that you may want to go down as well. It doesn't have to be entirely beautiful landscapes of the river. There's lots alongside the banks of the river that will pique your interest as well. So give that a go as well. I'm going to take some shots now of some of this texture and some of these angles, and we'll look at them later on as well. And you can look at shapes and repetitions as well. So let's see what that looks like back in the studio. Thanks, Alan. Let's have a quick look at some of those shots right now. So these are images I took in a fairly short space of time at the mill. You can see that I've done a nice wide shot, and then I've come closer. I've got shots of angles, I've got shots of patterns. I've thought about the texture, I've thought about lines, repetition here with the roof tiles, colour, Close-ups as well. This is the kind of thing that works quite well if you've got a little bit of time to explore your location and just see what you end up with. And there we have it. That's everything from me here. So I'll pass you straight back to Alan now. Alan, where are you? I'm here at the Fantasy Ducot. Sadly, fantasy is spelt with a PH and not an F, so it's not as exciting as it sounds. To conclude, we've looked at a couple of things today that might help with your photographs. Give them a go, see what happens. As ever, and I've said this before, really the main tip is get this and go outside. Get down to the lovely River Tay and get photographing. You'll come up with something, and please enter that into the competition. All that remains for me to say is genuinely the best of luck with all of this, and I really, really am looking forward to seeing your photographs and judging them in the spring. Take care of yourselves and get out there. Come on, you. I'm going for a coffee now. See you later.